We have now reached the moment where Reno has forded the Little Bighorn at Fort A, reassembled his troops, and is charging toward the village with scouts positioned on his left and right flanks, pursuing a small band of Native Americans. Meanwhile, Custer, leading 5 companies, is moving forward along the eastern bank. Benteen has concluded his reconnaissance mission and is approaching the junction of No Name Creek and Reno Creek, while the pack train is situated roughly 1 mile to the east of his column downriver from Reno's position. The village stretched from the vicinity, north of the now derelict Gary Owens store, to the opening of Medicine Tail Coulee. As was customary, the Hunkpapa led by Sitting Bull were camped at one end, with the Cheyenne at the opposite end. What was the native population present? Naturally, figures vary widely, but we can begin with the fact that George Crook encountered approximately 1,000 warriors just 8 days earlier at the Battle of the Rosebud. The notion that this warrior count could have tripled or quadrupled within a single week appears highly improbable. Therefore, for this discussion, we will adopt historian Dr. Richard Fox's assessment of no more than 2,000 fighting men and a total population of 6,000. Incidentally, the organization Friends of the Little Bighorn has meticulously reviewed many sources and has cataloged the identities of 941 individual warriors. It was an ordinary day in the camp following extended nighttime celebrations. Part of the pony herd was grazing on the western benchlands. Some women were collecting wild turnips. A number of men were away hunting, and many individuals were swimming and bathing in the river on this hot, arid, and almost perfectly calm day. The experience of White Bull serves as a good example. As a nephew of Sitting Bull, he had watered his 20 horses that morning, a herd that signified his considerable wealth within the community, and had then taken them out to pasture. Returning to the village, he ate a meal and was preparing for his day, which ultimately involved going back out to guide his horses to the river for their midday drink. To his astonishment, he suddenly heard shouts that soldiers were advancing. Reno's force was now storming across the valley. Generally tracing the river's path with companies G, A, and M, he also commanded Captain French to position a squad of 10 to 15 soldiers on the far right to secure that flank. Varnum, positioned alongside the scouts on the left flank, reported that as they advanced, warriors were emerging from the village and riding back and forth to generate a dust cloud, obscuring the settlement from view. Reno, commanding a force of only about 160 men, which included scouts and interpreters, upon realizing the enemy's numbers, concluded he had undertaken a more significant challenge than his unit could handle, and consequently commanded his troops to dismount and form a defensive line on foot. It is worth mentioning that after I released the video tour of the Reno Valley fight several months prior, I received numerous private communications detailing how and where the combat progressed. Typically, Reno directs his command to dismount and establish a skirmish line. The detachment from M Company on the right flank moves into a wooded area to maintain security, while Captain French relocates the remainder of the company to the left side of the formation. Company A dismounts, forms a skirmish line, and subsequently changes position with G Company, which then secures the right flank. There exist multiple theories regarding the precise location of Reno's engagement. It appears that identifying the most plausible option largely depends on the river's path in 1876. From this viewpoint, we can observe what is known as the Gary Owen Bend, which is now classified as an oxbow lake. We even have a contemporary instance of 2 oxbow lakes forming near the Reno crossing site. Here is a topographical map showing the river's course in 1980, and here is a satellite image of the identical area from 2016. If you have studied physical geography, you will know that once an oxbow lake is formed, it is no longer part of the active river channel, unless, of course, human intervention occurs. If the Gary Owen Loop was the active channel in 1877, as has been asserted, then it was unequivocally the active channel in 1876. Furthermore, flooding actually accelerates the process of a meander becoming an oxbow lake. It does not reverse it. We even have a contemporary instance of 2 oxbow lakes forming near the Reno crossing site. Here is a topographical map showing the river's course in 1980. And here is a satellite image of the identical area from 2016. If you have studied physical geography, you will know that once an oxbow lake is formed, it is no longer part of the active river channel, unless, of course, human intervention occurs. If the Gary Owen Loop was the active channel in 1877, as has been asserted, then it was unequivocally the active channel in 1876. Furthermore, flooding actually accelerates the process of a meander becoming an oxbow lake. It does not reverse it if we superimpose what I believe is the most accurate approximation of the river's 1876 course, then the geographical and archaeological evidence supports what I term the Dr. Scott line. Should the river have followed a different path, then other scenarios gain some credibility. As the command deployed into a skirmish line and commenced firing, Varnum claimed he saw E Company, the Gray Horse Company, moving along the bluffs on the far side of the river. We will return to the sightings of Custer shortly. In the village, White Bull drove his ponies to the Mini Conju camp and, after ensuring his family's safety, rode to the Hunkpapa camp, where he observed Sitting Bull urging the warriors to fight. As this was happening, bullets from the soldiers began striking the area. Native accounts indicate that several individuals in the village were wounded and killed by this long-range gunfire. The Sioux woman, moving robe, had been out digging for turnips and had run back to the village upon the soldiers' approach. There she received the news that her younger brother, Deeds, had been killed. As she prepared for battle and revenge, she noticed soldiers on the bluffs across the river. Please note that the distances from which the natives, and some of Reno's men in the valley, including Lieutenants Varnum and DeRudio, spotted the Custer Battalion on the bluffs, exceeded 1 mile. I was highly skeptical of these sightings, particularly DeRudio's assertion of seeing Custer on the bluffs, until I recalled something I witnessed while visiting the battlefield last September. While at the junction for Weir Point, I observed a group of horses near the entrance to Medicine Tail Coulee, so I drove down to that location, hoping to get a close look at one of them. Here they are. And as expected, I was unable to get near enough for a detailed count. However, the distance separating the two junctions is 1.43 miles. This measurement suggests that all of the previously mentioned sightings are entirely plausible. Reno became conscious of a threat emerging from the timber near the lead horses, and he moved in that direction with the remainder of the men from Company G, leaving Lieutenant Benny Hodgson to report on developments along the skirmish line. Conducting a personal reconnaissance of the wooded area may have been a sound initial idea, but Reno remained in the timber and consequently lost both situational awareness and command over the skirmish line. With the bulk of Company G in the woods, the skirmish line began to drift toward the timber, and as the Sioux started to envelop the left flank, M Company began a pivoting maneuver to protect it. Additionally, it appears that fire discipline was breaking down along the skirmish line. Captain Moylan stated he was compelled to send men away from the line to obtain more ammunition from the horses. Remember that a trooper carried only 50 rounds of carbine ammunition on his person. As the command pulled back, Sergeant Miles O'Hara of M Company was killed, and his body was left behind. As the combat persisted around the timber, Reno was questioning the whereabouts of Custer. He had not followed in support, but had been observed on the far side of the river. So, where was he? Reno did not believe the timber could be defended much longer, as his force was nearly surrounded. Consequently, we arrive at the point where we must ask ourselves, could the timber position have been held? You will probably dislike this answer, but it is possible. For success, the movement from the skirmish line into the timber would have needed to be more controlled. Some fire discipline established, a small reserve force created, and perhaps most critically, a resolute commander present. Reno was a veteran cavalry officer, but he was no Hal Moore. In any case, Reno did not believe he could hold the timber, and most of the 7th Cavalry's officers concurred with this assessment at the Reno Court of Inquiry in 1879 Reno, convinced his position was untenable, ordered the command to mount up for what he would later describe as a charge. However, with his command dispersed throughout the timber, many men, primarily from G Company, never received that order. Those who did had to scramble to reach their horses. Naturally, by this time, most of the firing line had disintegrated. This defensive collapse coincided with a renewed surge by the Sioux as Crazy Horse arrived at the timber. His presence energized the warriors, and many pressed forward into the timber at the precise moment Reno's command was coming apart. As the Sioux advanced and opened fire, a round struck Bloody Knife in the head, killing him instantly and splattering Reno with blood and brain matter. Undoubtedly shaken, Reno consequently ordered the soldiers to dismount, then ordered them to remount, which only added to the prevailing confusion. And with Reno shouting some manner of command, he led the galloping troopers, at least those who heard him, out of the timber. The Cheyenne warrior Wooden Leg had paused just south of the timber when suddenly he saw Reno's men charging directly toward him. While stopped at the Weir Point access road, I observed a herd of horses near the Medicine Tail Coulee entrance, and I proceeded to that location with the intention of examining one closely. Here they are, and as anticipated, I was unsuccessful in getting near enough for a proper inspection. Nonetheless, the span between the two access points measures 1.43 miles. This seems to confirm that all such visual accounts are entirely feasible. Reno grew conscious of a danger developing from the woodland near the front horses, so he proceeded there with the rest of Company G, instructing Lieutenant Benny Hodgson to keep him informed on the skirmish line's status. A brief personal assessment of the wooded zone might have been a sound tactic, but Reno remained within the timber, consequently forfeiting his grasp of the overall situation and his authority over the skirmish line. With the majority of Company G among the trees, the skirmish line started to shift toward the woods, and as the Sioux commenced flanking the left side, M Company started to swing around to defend it. Moreover, it appears that controlled firing was breaking down along the defensive line. Captain Moylan reported that he found it necessary to dispatch soldiers from the line to fetch additional cartridges from the horses. Keep in mind that a cavalryman carried just 50 rounds of carbine ammunition on his person. During the withdrawal, Sergeant Miles O'Hara of M Company was killed and his remains were left on the field. While the conflict raged near the timber, Reno was pondering Custer's location. He had not provided support as expected, but had been spotted on the opposite bank. So, where could he be? Reno did not consider the woods defensible for much longer, as his unit was close to being encircled. Thus we reach the crucial question: could the timber have been successfully defended? You will likely find this answer unsatisfactory, but it is possible. To have succeeded, the transition from the skirmish line into the timber would have required tighter control. Better fire discipline needed to be enforced, a small reserve unit formed, and perhaps most importantly, a determined leader needed to be in command. Reno was a seasoned cavalry officer, but he was no Hal Moore. In any event, Reno did not believe he could hold the timber, and most officers of the 7th Cavalry agreed with this view during the Reno Court of Inquiry in 1879. Convinced his situation was hopeless, Reno commanded his men to mount for what he would later define as a charge. However, with his forces dispersed throughout the woodland, many soldiers, chiefly from G Company, never received the command. Those who did had to rush to their horses. By this point, naturally, the majority of the firing line had vanished. This defensive breakdown happened just as the Sioux, energized by Crazy Horse's arrival at the timber, launched a fresh assault. His presence galvanized the warriors, and many pushed into the trees at the exact moment Reno's command structure fell apart. As the Sioux closed in and fired, a bullet struck Bloody Knife in the head, killing him and covering Reno with blood and brain matter. Undoubtedly shaken, Reno then ordered the soldiers to dismount, only to command them to mount again, which merely intensified the confusion. With Reno yelling some form of order, he then led the galloping cavalrymen, at least those who heard him, out of the timber. The Cheyenne warrior Wooden Leg had stopped just south of the woods when abruptly he saw Reno's troops charging straight toward him. Thinking the soldiers were attacking, he spurred his horse and resolved to make a swift escape. But when he glanced back, he saw the soldiers were actually fleeing toward the river. In an instant, Wooden Leg transformed from the hunted into the hunter. Reno's so-called charge was devolving into what many natives would later refer to as a buffalo hunt. The issue is not so much Reno's choice to quit the timber, but the manner of the retreat, which was executed in a frantic and completely disordered fashion. Driven eastward, Reno's battalion galloped and fought their path toward a crossing to the east, over the river, and up the steep cliffs. The Sioux killed 2 Arikara scouts during the retreat, one of them their leader, Bobtail Bull. Lieutenant Hodgson received a mortal wound while crossing the river, and you can observe his marker in this photograph. When Dr. Porter reached the bluff tops, he found Reno pacing agitatedly with a red bandana tied around his head, and Porter remarked to him, "Major, the men were pretty well demoralized, weren't they?" Reno retorted sharply, "That was a charge, sir." Well, that charge had cost Reno 41 casualties, including Lieutenants McIntosh and Hodgson. Meanwhile, to the north of Reno's disorganized mass, a nephew of the Oglala chief Red Cloud, named Short Bull, encountered Crazy Horse as he rode up and declared, "Too late, you missed the fight." He heard Crazy Horse respond, pointing north toward a large body of cavalry, which was Custer's column. "Sorry to miss the fight, but there is a good fight coming over the hill." And with that, Crazy Horse and his followers began moving down the bluffs back toward the river, with Short Bull joining them. The battle had only just begun.